I want to talk about why I think Ohio State versus Iowa this weekend isn't necessarily a juggernaut versus a juggernaut. It's more like a juggernaut versus a team that we think might be good, but also why I think this is a compelling matchup. I also want to invite you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. 61% of the people that watch this show haven't subscribed to it, which is a wild number. We have a tremendous amount of room for growth here, and we're in the middle of season. And next Saturday, I am going to be all in on everything that we're doing. Probably going to do more segments over the course of a weekend than we've done in quite some time. As we are building up to that, also taking a look at some of the games that are going to happen, like Ohio State, Oregon is a big one on the calendar next week. So it is also an interesting spot for Iowa because Iowa is coming off of a bye week with what is one of the best tailbacks in the entire country in Kaleb Johnson. What I think people forget about a player like Kaleb Johnson is that he probably is in the running for the Heisman Trophy if Ashton Jeanty isn't doing what Ashton Jeanty is doing. And that is remarkable. We're talking about a tailback at Boise State who is on pace for 2,545 yards and 39 TDs through just 4 games. He's already rushed for 845 yards through 4 games. It's a wild number. Also had 192 against Oregon, which should lead you to believe that Ohio State ought to be able to run the football against that defense, but we'll talk about Oregon a little bit later. I also think that when we talk about Iowa, we haven't been talking much about Kaleb Johnson up until now because he was really not that good till this season, and I wanted to know why. So I went back and I watched a little bit of Iowa's football last year and 2022, and I watched, Iowa State this year, where he went for a $187, and I watched Minnesota where he went for 200 plus. He's averaging 171 yards on the ground. He, again, is the second best tailback in college football right now, but what has changed about his game is he's really using his 6'1", 225-pound frame as a battering ram. Like, he's reminding me a lot of what it felt like to watch Mo Ibrahim play at Minnesota. Difference is Minnesota ran a lot of inside zone, a lot of duo with Mo Ibrahim, and that dude basically would cut back to the middle, and he would just go maul people. And that was how Minnesota was able to move the football. At Iowa, what Tim Lester has done is run a lot of wide zone with a sort of patchwork offensive line, but instead of taking that wide zone and then bouncing outside, perhaps needlessly if you're Kaleb Johnson in years past, this year he is using his plant foot like a clutch to get into the next gear. So you could see him going wide, cutting back right on his left foot, and going from 3rd to 4th to 5th through the hole, and then going, if you're in my way, I'm big enough, strong enough to run through you. And he's getting hard yards, which is another way to play peak Iowa football, right? We talk about punting is winning for Iowa. We talk about how much that Phil Parker defense means to the program and why one of the reasons that Kirk Ferentz has won a bunch of football games is that's what they do. They run the football and they play defense. You love that because you're wearing out the defense that you're playing because this running back in Kaleb Johnson is just going to keep punishing you. And that gives the offensive line a little bit more push. And then Tim Lester and Cade McNamara get to go into their bag and pull up some play action pass, which is where they're really going to have to succeed if they have a hope of beating Ohio State. Because the Buckeyes have been pretty damn good in the pass game and in the run game, if I'm being quite honest about it. They're only giving up 227 rush yards per game. That's not great, but it's inside the top 25 when you talk about rushing yards per game. Meanwhile, Iowa's averaging about 250, right? The difference here is Denzel Burke on the outside, Lathan Ransom at safety. You really do have to know where Caleb Downs is all the time. I think Jordan Hancock is one of the most slept-on defensive backs corners in the country, to say nothing of what Jim Knowles' defense has become. And I think this is a game for which Kaleb Johnson can announce himself to a larger audience, one that probably votes on the Heisman Trophy. And if they are the kind of team that finish the season with 2 losses or somehow make the Big Ten championship game, he's going to be the guy that everybody points to as the straw stirring that drink. It's also an interesting spot for Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson, who combined have about 663 yards, right, to like 685 for Kaleb Johnson. I think what Buckeye fans would like you to know about this, and what I think is most important about that combined 663 with 390 coming from, Quinshon Judkins, who had a game of games the last time that they played against Marshall. They're fresh, and they can go three deep at tailback if they need to. Like, James Peoples has almost as many rushing attempts as Travion Henderson does. And that's what you want if you're Ohio State. You want to be fresh in November, in December, when it is time to play win-or-go-home football. Right now, Iowa feels like a really good test of what that offense is capable of, because the last time that we saw Ohio State, they put in about 40% of the offense. They hadn't really sunk their teeth into what Chip Kelly thinks he's got left, because they haven't had to. From a skilled standpoint, they have outmatched everybody they played, and that's as it should be. You're playing directional Michigan. You're playing Marshall. You're not really Akron. You're not really getting challenged in a way that feels compelling. Then you go beat up on Michigan State, right? Where you're still looking at this and you're going, are they showing us a lot? No, they're showing us a lot of Jeremiah Smith, though, and we love seeing that. I think Jeremiah Smith could also build even more momentum for himself for Big Ten Freshman of the Year, which is, by the way, one of the only awards that Brian Hartline's receiver group has not garnered outside of the Heisman, right? When you talk about major individual awards, he could be the first dude to do that, and it's looking like that, depending on what Dylan Raiola does, because I think a quarterback would win that award against a wide receiver, mostly because he would be more important to winning at Nebraska than Jeremiah Smith is at Ohio State. That's not shade. It's just where Nebraska is and where Ohio State is. Emeka Egbuka, still your number one target out there, and you still got guys like Carnell Tate, Brandon Ennis, who need to eat, right, and probably will. And you're going to be running the football. So there's just that many opportunities, which is another reason why it is kind of outstanding what Jeremiah Smith has been able to do through these first 4 games. We're talking about 19 catches for 362 yards, 5 TDs. I mean, he's the second best wide receiver in the country according to production. Like, Ryan Williams goes off against Georgia for 177, including a 75-yard touchdown to seal a victory. I think with Ohio State, what I would like to see is Sonny Styles, Cody Simon really sink their teeth into this game. They haven't been the best at tackling in the open field. And that defensive line that Larry Johnson put together has done a lot of work, especially when Tyleik Williams has been healthy enough to go. And again, on the back end, they're as good, if not the best, in the country when you talk about the corner and safety grouping, the secondary grouping back there. I want to see if they can stop Kaleb Johnson. I want to see if they can run him down, and I want to see if they are willing to keep battering him in the hole, because that, I think, is where the real game is going to be played, and as far as what we're going to be able to extrapolate from the game. The spread is 19.5 points, right? The last time that Ohio State played Iowa at Ohio Stadium, I was actually at that game, and it wasn't close. Like, it was just done. It's a different team. It's a different time. But Iowa also has a quarterback in Cade McNamara that knows what it feels like to beat Ohio State, which is not a thing that a whole lot of people get to say. It's been 2 years since that game in 2021, but it is memorable because it broke the streak. Remember, Ohio State had beaten Michigan 9 times in a row until 2021 when Cade McNamara and Michigan beat Ohio State. We know about Connor Stallions. We know they stole signs, but I think that's significant because you understand what it takes on the football field to try to beat that team. And you know that running the ball is the way you're going to probably bend Ohio State into the kind of team that you think you can beat, but you also got to hit on those passes when you make those attempts. When you go deep, when you have your play actions, you're not going to be able to just be check down Charlie and be able to beat this Ohio State team. I think Kaleb Johnson also added a little bit more fuel to the fire, because while we got that McNamara Michigan angle, we have him being a dude that grew up in Columbus, in Ohio, and was recruited kinda to go to Ohio State. And he said, look, even if they had really kind of offered me, I wouldn't go because I wanted to go to a place where I could beat them. I would love to know where that animosity comes from for what is, the third pro team in the state of Ohio. But it's there, right? It's there for him like it was for Rod Moore at Michigan. And it's always fascinating to me to see guys that the great state of Ohio grows up in high school football that end up playing not at Ohio State, and there are reasons as to why. Most of the time, they just weren't recruited. Like Drew Aller also kind of comes to mind. You can keep going down the line, but I'm going to finish it with trying to make people understand just what it means for folks to want to beat Ohio State, or what it means to Ohio State fans that Ohio natives might leave the state to go play football. Chris Spielman tells a story that I really love in this HBO documentary about the rivalry, the game. And he was an All-American high school linebacker, state of Ohio. Dad's an Ohio State fan. He's raised an Ohio State fan. He takes a trip to Michigan, and his dad lets him because he's a good father. And he comes back, and he tells his father, you know, Dad, I really like Michigan. And his dad's kind of quiet. I think I want to go to Michigan. And his dad loses it. Look, I have put up with this. I have listened to you. I have let you go up there to visit the team up in North School. But you are going down the highway to play at Ohio State, you traitor. And that's what it means, man. So when these dudes are saying it, like Kaleb Johnson's like, I want to go beat them, was raised in Ohio. I would really like to know where that's coming from and what parents are thinking about this when, I don't know, dog. If my kid was being recruited by Ohio State or had the opportunity, I don't know that I would lean away from that. I think I would lean into it. I really do. That said, any kid of mine's probably going to end up in Oklahoma anyway, so what are we talking about? Deuces.